Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our team at Founding Fuel, we're delighted to welcome you all to this conversation on resilience and leadership, led by Kaushik Gopal. This is an important conversation to have, we believe, at this unprecedented time, because it gives us an opportunity to step back and reflect on what we're really going through as leaders. Now, for more than a month, Founding Fuel has remained laser focused in studying and trying to understand what leaders and organizations are kind of going through, what strategies they're using to stay on top of the cataclysmic changes that are breaking out around us, not just in India, but around the world. Most of you would be familiar with the body of work we've produced through this intense period of churn, but based on multiple conversations with leaders who were in this vortex of this storm, it is pretty clear that we are in uncharted territory. And we would need a new playbook for leaders, because many of the existing tools of leading a business, like scenario planning, for instance, were likely to fail us at this time, because no one had quite seen this kind of uncertainty and volatility ever before. So the moot question is, what do you do to thrive in these volatile times? That's why the format for today's conversation is important, because it is through these deeper conversations that we will be able to gather wisdom from each of you, and also combine it with what Kaushik has seen in the course of his deep work with leaders around the world. I will do a quick round of introductions to our special guests this evening, one by one. So I'll go with Satish first. Hello, Satish. Welcome to this session. I know you're joining us from Pune.
Hi everyone. Hi, Indrajit.
Yeah. Hi, Satish. Welcome to the session. Vedika.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be on this session.
Vaiti is joining us from Bangalore. Ipsita from Bombay. Okay. And Judhajit.
Hello, everybody.
Shrinath.
Thanks, IG, for inviting me, and good evening, everyone. Delighted to be here.
Thank you, Shrinath. And Arun Anant.
Hi, IG. Thank you for calling for this one.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. I will now hand over to my colleague Kavi, who will facilitate the session, explain the rules of engagement, and most importantly, introduce Kaushik and his work to you. So over to you, Kavi.
Thanks, IG. I see a number of familiar faces. Great to be here. We got started talking on this topic a few weeks ago when Kaushik and me were talking to a few colleagues from China, trying to understand what's happening in a few other markets. And we were grappling with what's happening all around the world, about how leaders were themselves trying to make sense of what's happening around them. And so at that time, we heard about Kaushik's work in this area. Kaushik and me, we've been friends for a long time. I look up to him. He's a senior colleague. You must have gone over his profile. But more importantly, he's an avid person who works extensively with people in making a difference to their lives, which is what endears me to him. And so we designed this as a very intensely conversational piece, which is one side which will come from Kaushik's research and understanding, but more to thread out new meaning from all of us over here. So this is going to be almost like T20. We're going to break out into small groups, but come back. It's going to be very intensely conversational. But at the same time, we want to anchor it on sound fundamentals. And that will be provided by Kaushik, but we're not going to be restricted by that. We're going to try and draw on all our collective experiences, disappointments, joys, emotions over the last few weeks, and try and thread out what are possibilities for the future. So that's the overarching design, if I were to call it, for this time, for the next 90 odd minutes. We've tried to keep it very simple. We try to keep it very, very simple. And at the end of it, we want to keep it practical as well. We don't want to make it extremely a very interesting conversation without anything coming out practical. So that's going to be the format. Without any further ado, may I hand it over to Kaushik for you to set the context and for you to move it further.
Yeah, okay. So, hi, everyone. And absolute pleasure to be here and to be in this kind of context of sharing thoughts and thinking about what's happening. As one person said, quite recently, that there is a deep sense of uncertainty about it. And so, one is not coming into this conversation with any sense of certainty, of clarity. But I think we are all like the blind man, proverbial blind man, feeling our way with a stick, and trying to figure out what exactly is happening. So, I'm going to be sharing my screen shortly. Before that is up, I just thought I'd, broadly tell you that my journey, in a sense, at least work-wise, started up with, many, many moons ago. I just turned, 60, I'm going to be 61 next month. I decided to study the behavioral sciences many years ago. Became a psychologist, a psychoanalyst, and then I sort of moved from being a psychoanalyst to today I'm more of a business psychologist. I work currently with YSC, which is a leadership strategy organization. And, I'm just on the verge, in fact, of going independent. This particular, thing what got me started was a group of people under the title of the Coaching Foundation of India that were running a series on hope, optimism, resilience, and more. And they were sort of really talked about, that how does one begin to approach what's happening now in today's time? And, is there something about meaning and purpose and the work of Viktor Frankl and things like that that we can all possibly reflect on? So I thought a great deal about this, and I said that let me sort of do this differently. Let me not come in with what people have said from the past. Let me sort of focus on this in a slightly different way. Let me talk to people in our lives, in the kind of, from leaders, from professionals, people who have been in different industries, and let me sort of get a sense of what exactly is happening in their lives, and because otherwise we are making all kinds of, I think there are assumptions that we are making, and we just think in a certain kind of way. So this, I put it together in that way, and I'm going to be talking to you about that. Before that, I just thought, just a couple of things as we are warming up to what's going to happen. I found this from this quote from a Vipassana practitioner, which I particularly liked. That a virus is contagious. Likewise, fear is contagious. We don't have to be carriers of fear. I think to me that really speaks a lot, because how do we sort of, in this emotionally charged time, how do we sort of keep our minds in a space that we can think more about what's happening? So if I have a question of all of you as we get into this, and all of you have, just like all of us actually have been navigating this lockdown. But if there were 3 words that you would use, which would in a way summarize your experience of this lockdown, what would it be? Let's just kind of go around the room and have a look at what words would just strike you. Anybody? I mean, we don't have to go sequentially or anything like that.
Let me take a shot. Yeah. I would look at visibility, communication, and I guess a phrase, rapid decisioning.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Shrinath. Thank you for being the first one.
I am happy to go next. So I would say uncertainty, the new normal. It's not a word. It's like a phrase.
That's okay. You can play around a little bit.
And communication. Yeah.
So let me go next. I picked 3 words: good, bad, ugly.
Okay. All right.
I'd say strength, balance, and planning.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you, Ipsita. Yeah. Who else would like to go? Kavi, do you want to take a shot at it yourself?
We'll have a few others going and then I'll go.
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Okay. Intense. I don't have a word. It's opportunity to step up and also step up in engagement. Opportunity to step up in leadership and step up in engagement.
Okay, lovely.
So I'd say it's been humbling, exasperating, and learning.
Okay. I must, before anybody else goes, I want to share mine also, and that is concern, curiosity, and I don't know how to get a adjective for this, but dishes. That's been my thing, that I'm the dishwasher at home. So, yeah. Who would like to go next?
Arun was going.
Yeah. Yeah. Should I go
Yeah,
next?
yeah,
Please.
please, Arun. Yeah.
Tough love, cautious optimism, renaissance.
Nice.
Satish?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Perfectly.
Two words in one, so you'll have to cope with that, Kaushik. Resilient reserves. And I mean, just new, fresh, different, whatever under that bucket one. Another double-barreled one, which is fear and excitement.
Right, lovely, thanks.
Okay. Aji?
Yeah, I'll go next. I have empathy, intensity, and discovery.
Thanks, Aji.
Yeah. Shweta, would you want to take a shot?
Yes, so 3 words for me is priorities, balance, and my anchors. And anchors are people as well as actions.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Swami?
Yeah, I got 3 words here. Starting with disruption, and virtually everything that I had planned got disrupted. But also a chance or an opportunity to make new connections and also new energy.
Thanks, Swami.
Okay. Ram?
Yeah, I would go with speed, anxiety, and opportunity.
Yeah. Anmol?
For me, it's thought-provoking. I would say entrepreneurial and community.
Okay. Okay, so Kaushik, for me, it is empathy, redesign, and imagine. So.
Lovely. Great, thank you for that. And thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot so quickly. You know, I was just thinking about adjectives about yourself. But it's amazing. You can see the range of responses that have come. You know, I don't think that they're sort of immediately puttable in a certain bucket. And I think that's the beauty of this, that it's possibly, you know, there's such a variety of different responses. And I'm going to try to pull it all together as, you know, as we go on further in terms of what I've actually found, and see how we can weave these things actually together. Now, the the broad flow of the conversation that we're going to be having today is we are going to be tapping your experiences. And, just like I've tapped into the experiences of other people, we're going to also tap your experiences. I'm going to share with you what we found through the conversations with leaders about themselves, about other leaders. We're also going to look at how the narrative needs to change. Is there something that we as leaders, we're carrying some sense of responsibility, that do we need to sort of start thinking differently? Can we steer things in a certain way? And I'm also going to share with you a model for possibly the new narrative, and which doesn't mean that this is the model or anything, but just a way of thinking about it. So that's broadly what the focus is going to be. Before we sort of go any further, I found myself, grappling with this whole thing of intense change, and trying to, in a sense, normalize it for myself, or standardize it for myself in a way, by comparing it to the kind of intense changes that happen in different, in different parts of our lives, and which one of us doesn't have intense changes happening. Broadly, one can, when I thought about it, you could really classify change in terms of at an individual level. Change happens. Massive change sometimes happens. Some people can get into a state where there's an existential crisis that is there. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it that I'm doing? All kinds of things like that. Sometimes you can have a situation where a small group of people, like a family, goes through a huge crisis. Suddenly the breadwinner of the family is no more. What do we do? Huge responsibility comes on some of the younger members. At the larger collective level. And one of the really interesting stories that I thought about for some reason in this collective space is I was thinking about appetite for some reason. And I thought about the way that a person like a Nelson Mandela, when he came out of prison, and there was this dismantling of appetite that had taken place. The way that he changed the entire dialogue, to moved it from civil war to something which was very constructive. And when I look at this entire process of change, of intense change, I find that there is a certain flow that is there. There's a crisis, there's suffering which happens, there's a meaning-making process which takes place also, and then there's an emergence. So there is a certain kind of a flow, and which results in that emergence. And when I look at, generally from the past, tapping into, as it were, all those insights from the past. So having said that, I am keen that, how have all of you been responding, not only within yourselves, but what have you seen in leaders that you're connected with, that you work with? How have they been, in a sense, responding or reacting to this present crisis? So this is the question that I have for you. I don't want you all to respond to it directly here with all of us present. I think this is where Kavi is going to help us get into little breakout rooms, so where we can have a little deeper discussion. Kavi, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushik. So what's going to happen now is we're going to break out into smaller groups. So we're going to have 3 groups from here. We're going to go into a separate room, so to speak, virtually into a separate room. We're going to have a small conversation there. And the question, Kaushik, you're asking, can you please repeat the question alone?
So the question is, how have you seen leaders responding or reacting to the present crisis?
Okay, so that's the question. And I will give you, if we can please get to the next slide alone, I'll just tell you some rules for the breakout session. So as soon as you go into the breakout session, you'll be automatically assigned to a group. Please decide on one person who will be a timekeeper and somebody who will come out and share what you discussed in your groups. So that's important. And it's good for you to share a particular story. I mean, it's important to share one story at least per person of what you have seen that stayed back with you, and therefore what it means to you. So about 90 seconds to 2 minutes per person. You share, and as soon as you finish sharing, you will get to know when we say, please come back, you'll get 10 minutes for this. When we say come back, you will get a notification which says the host is calling you back into the room in 1 minute. So you will get a notification for 1 minute, and then you will automatically be called back into the main group. After you come back to the main group, you're going to each group, whoever has taken on the role of summarizing and synthesizing for the whole group, will share one story from amongst all your stories, one story that you think should be shared with the rest of the group, which will stand out as something that you think is important to share. You don't have to take names. This part of the session is not going to be recorded, so you don't have to take names, but just a story so that all of us understand what are some underlying currents that you are seeing in your ecosystems that's going to be helpful for all of us. So that's the overall broad schema. Just go in, small group. You please anoint somebody who will summarize. Please get a timekeeper, and then get the conversation going. About 90 seconds to 2 minutes per person, and Kaushik has already announced the topic. Good enough. Would you have any questions, anybody? Okay, all right. So Anmol, can you please?
Welcome back, Vedika, Satish.
Thank you.
Apologize that we were taking a bit more time. There's one story yet coming in, and I hope I bought them enough time by raving and ranting over here so that that one story gets done in the meanwhile.
Okay. Who's with you, Satish?
Judhajit, Ipsita, and Tommy.
Okay.
Okay. So, Anmol, do we have everyone back?
So this is left, but I think
okay.
out of time, yeah.
So that's where the timer is going, right? So
Yeah.
you have like 20 seconds more. Okay. Yeah. This is what I like about Zoom, you know, you have to come back. Unlike in a real program, you know, flesh and blood, they like they go on discussing for a long time.
Anmol, you're brutal here. Side messages didn't help.
I'm just the messenger.
Oh,
Yeah.
We all love shooting the messenger.
Yeah, I tried to buy some time here, Swami, by giving a long, elaborate explanation while I hope Judhajit's story got finished.
Yeah, Judhajit, yeah. I mean, he was. We got some of the stuff covered, but certainly we would have loved to spend more time listening to Judhajit. Yeah, but anyway, so.
Okay. No, I'll add mine now.
Anmol, the technical has brought us back here. Okay.
All right. So welcome back, everyone. And I hope that you have had, at least the people who have been able to speak, that you've, had interesting things to say, and you've made some kind of sense of it. So maybe what we could do is use this as a time to, just share. Let's hear you. Who would like to summarize from each group? So since we've got 3 groups, there'd be 3 people summarizing.
Yeah, so in these kinds of groups, it's always interesting to note that everybody's interested to know what happened in the other group as well. So we'll be very keen to know what happened in each of the groups. So one story and a general sense of what happened. What was the drift of the conversation from your group? Yes, please.
So I'm happy to go first. This is Vedika here. So we had a good group, 4 of us. Each of us got to speak. Each of us got to share a story. Nice. I would say 3 stories were on the more positive side. 1 story was a little bit not so positive. The one we agreed that I would share is a positive story. So in this particular situation, it's a business which is sort of making a re-entry back into the country. So it's almost like a startup. And the point here was that the leaders who are able to thrive are the ones who can sort of step back and take this opportunity, take this slowdown in activity, in slowdown in travel, etc., to just sort of step back and reflect on the way forward. And these are the leaders who are not subsumed by this uncertainty and volatility, who are able to use this chaos to really guide and push their team to think ahead and to think about what lies ahead. And this leader was able to get 2 or 3 strands, both by thinking himself, but also working with the team, of what they could do post this situation. So in terms of talent acquisition, in terms of M&A opportunities. So, he really threw this challenge to the team and said, let's use this lockdown, let's use this slowdown in activity to take a real deep look at our model, to really think deeply about what's the way forward. And we all agreed that this was a very inspiring form of leader.
Lovely. That's very well said, Vedika. So thank you for that. Wonderful. Okay, who would like to go next?
Yeah, hi, Arun here.
Yep, Arun.
We had lots of thoughts and one story. So the story is of a restaurant owner. He runs a chain of restaurants, and naturally his business has collapsed at this point of time. And what's wonderful is that he has a sense of purpose in the business and compassion for his people, to the extent that he has now dipped into his pockets to keep the organization running, paying salaries to all these guys, because he knows that that's what needs to be done, and that the future should be better. So that's the big story. Some of the thoughts that came across were, one, leadership is not hierarchical. It's not necessarily the person who you had nominated as leader who's showing the real leadership. There could be all kinds of people in the organization who've shown absolute leadership. And so there was an example of an insurance company person that was cited. And apart from that, so leadership was the largest thought. Apart from that, going back to core of doing business, which is like looking at cash flows, which links back to even the restaurant story. And finally, being as a leader, being in touch with the front line and being in touch with clients.
Okay. Lovely. That is brilliant. Thank you very much, Arun, for that. Yeah, so we have one more group.
Yeah, so I'll go for our group. Judhajit here.
Judhajit, go ahead. Yeah.
So we shared lots of thoughts, and we didn't get around to sharing too many stories, but so I'll weave in the story later.
Okay.
We looked at it in terms of 3 distinct phases, and Ipsita set the template in terms of the pre-COVID, pre-lockdown period, and the lockdown period, and already the talk about the post-COVID period. And when we looked at the pre-COVID period, Swami shared the whole challenge in terms of being in the present and trying to manage the crisis, getting laptops or VPN connections. And I didn't get to share my story in the group, but that was really a big focus area for all of us in terms of enabling work from home and focusing on employee safety. And so there was this a sense of urgency and getting everything done quickly, and everybody stepping up and organizations collaborate. I mean, people in the organizations collaborating just to ensure that business continuity can take place. And then we described that in terms of leadership qualities, if I were to use that word. So we look at a continuum. There were these people who had, in a sense, they were not willing to confront reality and project an illusion of control. That was a term that Satish brought to the table. And then you have the other set of people who paralyzed and who don't know what to do. And then you have the people who really don't know. I mean, trying to respond to the whole situation. So from and as the lockdown began and we saw some people taking charge. So some of the qualities that seem to have emerged is people who started looking at how to reimagine and have authentic conversations with their teams and build trust with the team, versus people who would refuse to accept reality and try to and get stuck in that zone they were, that the shift had happened. And once it became clear that the shift has happened, I think I wanted to add this bit. One of the things which was heartening for me to see it in the context of my organization was really the primacy of employees and their health and their safety, and the ability of an organization to then respond in a multi-stakeholder management framework. I mean, respond to customers, respond to regulator, respond to shareholders, respond to all different, the community concerns, the employee concerns. And I think we ended with Satish saying this bit about Ratan Tata's quote, where he talked about how do we convert adversity into opportunity? And really, can this be an impetus for public housing? I mean, the way we look at a sustainable urbanization. And if we were to, from this period, if we move forward, we can really build on that. That will be a great shift in terms of how do we make life better for all our citizens.
Wonderful. Lovely. Thank you, Judhajit. Was there a story that you were going to also tell us, or was it?
We didn't get to really share stories except for that bit I talked about Swami. And in my context also, being in the present and trying to make, enable people to work from home. A lot of crisis management in terms of getting laptop shifted and getting VPN connections done, remote IT help desk. So trying to get everybody to step up in a crisis to really deal with the present situation so that we don't, so business continuity keeps on. So that was the story that was shared.
Okay, perfect, lovely. I think that's excellent, and this is probably a good segue to get into a little bit more detail about the conversations that I also had with different people, and so the fact is that in terms of at a very broad level, there's the fact that we've moved from freedom to highly restricted movement, from being trusting in everyday contacts to feeling extremely wary of other people. And there's stories there, which are quite drastic, from stability of life to potential disaster, financial, health-wise, and so on, and from long-standing routine to disruption and the need to rethink time and activity. This is contextual, and this is where the shifts have taken place. So when we spoke to people, what we found was that there were two vectors that basically stood out. And the two vectors were, I call them there's the us and me vector. And then we have the solution focus and the problem focus vector. So I'm going to hit on the us and me vector first and tell you what that is about. And then I'm going to look at, how when we combine this, that there's a certain kind of almost like there's certain personalities that seem to fit into 4 different quadrants, right? So I'm going to kind of look at that. So people who were on the us side, and let me just also give you a little bit of a qualifier here, which is that we're not talking about, it's a continuum that you need to keep in mind, that people could be anywhere in the continuum. They could even have bits of this and bits of that. But when one is so this is a process of just looking at it in polarized ways to understand it better. So on the us side of the continuum, you had people who were very, thinking interdependent, looking out for each other. There was an underlying bond of affection that was there. There was also a lot of hearing of others, finding common ground, and so on. And there was time also factored in for the self. It was not always us. You had people saying things like, I have time to, walk up and down the staircase to get some exercise or something like that. And on the me side of the equation, there was the people who thought very independently. The focus was what I have to do, my needs, my space, my newspaper. And this is from an actual story, and this is when the newspapers were still happening. and don't like being told, feeling restricted, feeling frustrated. We also found that the natural dispositions of people were actually amplified during this time. And that was, so if you were more interdependent earlier, it was that, it sort of became more intensified during this period. If you were more independent earlier, that also got more intensified. So that's one of the things that we found. So in the solution focus versus the problem focus, what we found was, and there's a lot of stuff over here, and I'm not going to read out everything to you. I'm going to really focus on some of the things that really stood out. First of all, there's this issue of acceptance. In the solution-focused people, there was a sense of acceptance of what was taking place. And therefore, there was an adapting, and they were alert, they were proactive. They were taking charge of what needed to be done. There was a certain matter of factness, and there was a quick adaptation to it, which in a way is also a bit of a problem, because they can come across as being almost overly rational, and so much so that they could be dismissive towards the emotional states of others. So this was not necessarily all good, right? There was also a sort of a learning and growing that was taking place. What do I do? What are the kind of things that I need to study right now? Finding new opportunities. This was also a time that people were discovering each other. There was joint problem solving. There was thinking innovatively. So somebody, for instance, said that, look, we aren't able to produce right now. Let's use our manufacturing line to manufacture ventilators, So that was the kind of innovation that we found happening in the very solution-focused category. In the problem-focused category, what we found was the level of acceptance was much lower. There was more anxiety, there was more panicking, there was greater distress. There was a sense of keeping emotions also locked inside. There was impatience, there was a sense of being caught in the weeds. Catastrophizing was a part of it, loss of authority. There was another one which is important, which was waiting to be directed, waiting to be told what to do. And so these were some of the things that happened in the problem focus. Now, what we did was we said that we spent some time looking at all this data that came. And we said that what does all of this mean? And how would it look, if we sort of put this into, 4 quadrants. And what emerged was there were 4 types that seemed to come out. And don't look at these types as extremely hard and fast, right? And what I found is that there's a certain amount of play. So when I actually tried this out with somebody, I found that they could connect with something. They found that they were partly in one, but they were also partly in another. So, allow for that kind of way of looking at it. So first of all, in the denial group, it was interesting. And the story here is about this guy who's this logistics, person. He's in charge of logistics, and he's an absolute perfectionist. So he wants everything to move and function in a well-oiled way. So the moment this kind of situation happens, he wants to make it happen in a business as usual way. So there's a fight that happens, push it, demand things, make it happen. And, everybody down the line also feels that pressure of making it happen. So for instance, make sure that, the trucks are moving, this is happening. And the fact is that that's not possible, but still there is this attempt to make it happen. And when it doesn't happen, there's a sense of depression, despondency, spirits start to go down. So that was the denial group of people that we saw, which was combination of the me part and the problem focus part. Then what we found is that in the us and the problem focus, there was another very interesting example. And this was a manufacturing head. Again, a very conscientious, very diligent kind of a person. And he started finding that people were unable to come. And he was saying, well, how are we going to manage? So there was clearly an us focus there. What are we going to do? There was a sense of helplessness, where things were not taking place. And he was freezing. He was wanting somebody else to tell him what needs to be done. What should I do? Pleading with people, as if that pleading was going to lead somewhere. So that was this manufacturing head. Then we come down to the me and the solution focus. And, the story around that was this person who is in a financial services company, very senior leader over there, very, very adept at the digital space, you see. And he knew it really well. They are working in the global space also. And the moment this lockdown happened, he was able to transition into the online space, with great ease. It just went automatically into that space. However, there were people from his team down the line who weren't able to do it in the same way that he was able to do it. So he got impatient with them. Why aren't you guys managing? We are doing all this for you. So there was a sense of very low empathy, not being able to understand where they were coming from. And there was the sense of deep impatience with them. And we call this the autopilot group, because the sense that it should be actually, happening seamlessly, and so they function like an autopilot. The fourth category is another very interesting one, which is it's the combination of us and solution focus. And the example here, the story here is about a person who's the head of an apparel manufacturing, company. So, apart from the units, they've got, the retail, et cetera, et cetera. And, one of the things that started happening here is that he could clearly see the magnitude of the problem. And he brought key people together and created a kind of a common ground space for looking. In fact, one of the examples that you guys talked about is this opportunity to sort of think about what is actually happening. Very much like that. I think Vedika, your group that was talking about that. There was a sense of joint problem solving that was being looked at. And, there's also great empathy that is over here. Now, obviously, when you look at a model like this, what it says is that, while this is the kind of, the top right quadrant is the space that one needs to get to. But the reality is that you'll find people in all the other three places as well. And the question is that what is the responsibility of the people who are in that connected space to begin to say that, okay, how do I work with the people who are feeling victimized? How do I even begin to notice them? What stands out about them? How do I work with the people who are in denial or in the autopilot kind of a space? And, an example of this is where, again, a very large, organization, and I don't want to kind of give any sense of the identity because you guys will know what it is. The kind of pressure that is happening to people, they're talking about things like we've got meetings all the way from 9 to 9. Zoom has taken over our lives in such a way that there's absolutely no sense that, and the person is saying it to you, she's saying that I as a mother, I've got to handle the children who are there at home, they're not going to school, their work, the food that needs to be cooked, the cleaning that needs to be done, everything. And yet from 9 to 9, I'm kind of on the Zoom because I'm being expected to. And this is it's a very, high-end organization, great talent that it has with it. But the responsibility that needs to happen is that what do we as an organization do? Are we really listening down the line? Are we really kind of paying attention to what is the impact of this on different people? We can't just say we are in the connected, so all is good with us. Yeah. So this is, let me also pause over here to bring any kind of questions and so on. Any comments, any questions? Because if we don't, then I'm also going to hand over to Kavi. Kavi, maybe you can also take care of the questions and also go into the poll at this point. Okay?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So
I just wanted to, can I make a quick comment?
Please.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I think there's a time element also, right? So, I mean, somebody might be in a different quadrant and might move over time to another quadrant. And that doesn't need to be a long period of time. It can be a really short period of time also.
Yeah.
That was one point I wanted to make. And the second was, as you rightly said, it's really, really important to bring your team members who might be in different quadrants
that's
to
the
the right
critical.
space.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, but you're right, Vedika. Time is a critical part. People can move. It's not as if you're stuck in being one type of person. But I found that there is a certain predilection, or a certain preference, but more like an unconscious preference, to.
Kaushik, can I come in for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I very much appreciate and have a lot of empathy for the scholars who study these subjects, and the need for action pushes us to categorize. There is a utility to that, and there is a power in that, whether it is by propensities of a larger magnitude in one than the other. If I can sort them out, then I can address those sorted segments or categories in an appropriate way and draw. But unfortunately, my limited experience has been that you tend to find people with contextually stronger predisposition into one quadrant or another, but not genetically coded to be in one place. There are a few people who are deeply wedded to one combination.
Right.
But most of the people that I've had to work with, and maybe because I'm not working with a corporate bunch of people right now in this environment, my information and anecdotal data may be off the mark. But if that is the reality, that we tend to be contextually responding or triggered in one combination of me and us, or solution and problem, as you put it, to me, there are many other variables one would classify with for meaningful interpretation or acting or responding or even working with people as one would today. Then the sense making and the solution seeking becomes much more humanized, and a workable, practical response in that may be more possible, was the first thought that occurred to me. So I just leave it there.
Right. No, I hear you. And if I look at a couple of points over there, one is that, yes, this is polarizing it in a certain way, just to be able to see, what are some of the personalities. But I think there's another aspect of what you're saying, is that a person might move to a certain way of being, but intrinsically be something else. Is that sort of something that you're also implying?
To bestow people with a fixity, I found practically a bit unreal. I found a fluidity that happens. There is an anchoring in one or the other combination of parameters, but there is also a degree of fluidity and responses, which actually gives the space for us to trigger different responses from people in a context in which they seem to be going into a victim kind of mode or into a autopilot kind of mode. So these make sense to me more as mode categorizations rather than deeply genetically coded personality propensities.
I don't think I'm even trying to talk about that as being genetically coded at all. This is just that in this crisis, this is what some of the types, that are emerging, and a way of thinking and a way of categorizing them. But, just in order to put a frame around the complexity, that's it. But I hear you completely, Satish. Yeah. Anybody else? Right, Kavi, would you like to kind of take it to the poll?
Yeah, sure. Anmol, would you want to deploy the poll? There's a quick question for all of us to answer. So what are you seeing more was a question.
Kaushik, can I sidestep the categorization? I mean, I'll take one if you want, but the reality is, I'm seeing a lot of one category trying very hard to move, another category struggling with those realities and not being comfortable, but still feeling compelled to respond from there. So a lot of fluidity in this. The intellectual elegance of finding 20% victimized and 33.3% denial, I'm again exaggerating and maybe trivializing something serious. But that categorization, while it's intellectually convenient, it doesn't seem very real to me. Yeah, I can say, I see a lot of people in denial. Maybe, on some subjects, more than half the people are in denial. But on a certain other context, in a certain other way, I mean, you look at the kind of people I see working in organizations, the leaders I see driving organizations to come work past this crisis. Most of the people I'm talking to are connected, as you would describe it. There are people who are in the other modes, but most of the guys who are leading organizations today are predominantly in all the characteristics of a connected mode.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to hear some of the other voices as well, so. I can't see everybody, but okay, so we are seeing a kind of a mix if there's a forced choice that is happening. So while connected is at about 50%.
So, Kaushik, if I can just share,
Sure, Shrinath, go ahead. Yeah.
Over my career, I've sort of experienced 3 different organizations, and interestingly gone through crisis situations in all 3 of them. Obviously, different types of crisis situations. But what I have picked up is, contrary to a conventional view that there are only certain types of organization which have people who have that ability to respond, in that connected manner. I actually found that, it seems to be a reasonably uniform phenomenon. I mean, there were very few instances I can think of where, people didn't sort of rise positively to the challenge being faced. So yes, there would be pockets in the organization which would go through the, the continuum of, the approach to dealing with a crisis. But what I've observed is, and without really focusing on top management leadership, I think leadership across different levels, they somehow catalyzed movement to sort of create that positive response, at least in the organizations that I've sort of been part of. So, so in fact, the framework that you put really resonated, but this is also the other observation, which I thought.
No, appreciate that. Thank you, Shrinath.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, so Vedika, Judhajit both. So maybe Vedika first and then Judhajit.
Okay, sorry, I know I've spoken earlier, but very quick comment I wanted to make was, I think in times of crisis, actually, people do look for, one of the ways to reduce anxiety or to reduce the uncertainty is if you have a higher purpose, right? So if you are collaborating towards solving a problem, or if you're focused on something else. And I think good leaders, and I agree with the point which was made by earlier speaker, I think good leaders are who can get the teams across to be thinking about a higher purpose and solving a bigger problem. And that's a great way to move people across the quadrants.
Okay, thanks Vedika. Judhajit.
No, so I just wanted to share that, in a personal capacity, one has also been fluid. And that's based on the context and the kind of person you're interacting with also, because a part of our responses are also triggered by the response that we get from other people. So it's very, very context specific and context specific to the situation, to the individual or the group of individuals. So we alternate but yes, if you want to get things moving and move forward, of course, you have to be more solution focused and more us. That, I mean, any one of us at a leadership level realize that, but the point is that we also alternate, and that is dependent on the context.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Judhajit.
So I wanted to make a quick point.
Yeah.
I also think that some of it could be a reflection of a person's age and also where the organization is. So early stage organizations, startups may behave very differently. If it's led by a young person, may behave very differently. So whether you're in a denial or a victimized or an autopilot mode. If you're in a large organization, you've been there for long periods of time, you've seen businesses, you may respond differently. So, a lot of it perhaps is not the individual leader's response to the crisis, but the way they are and who they are and how they are and where they are will also be significantly impacting the way they respond, because the response is something that is coming very naturally. I don't think these are, in a sense, thought through responses, right? Because none of us know what to do. So the reality is they're all responding in a very natural manner. But the natural manner has been predisposed by a whole set of history that they're all carrying. So I have a feeling that perhaps that's also playing a role. What I'm trying to say is, if you pick a 50-year-old male and take 150-year-old males in exactly the same type of organization and run this poll, you probably get far more results where one single behavior dominates, and you won't maybe get this fixed. That's the way I feel about it.
Right. Okay, lovely.
I think, the thought I would add to this is, I think there are two characteristics in people that define, to some extent, I think you said at the beginning, Kaushik, that people's best and, or somebody said best and worst come out in a situation like this. So, whether we're seeing it in our own companies with our peer leaders, or we're seeing it at the grocery store, the once in 2 weeks that we're stepping out, or we're seeing it in our own building complexes. We're kind of seeing the people who kind of shut the elevator door quickly and don't hold it open for you when you're struggling with packages behave the same way when, you need to sort of extend a hand to a neighbor.
Right.
I think there are two underlying characteristics in leaders that make a big difference in a time like this. One, I think, is actually quite simple, and it's clarity of thought. People who can separate signals from noise quickly or find patterns in chaos quickly tend to do better to adapt and do a lot of the things that come with good leadership in a period of time like this. If you can really sort of distill as quickly as possible with changing time, so your distillation might change your points of view, but if you can capture the way other people sort of interpret things, it's helpful. And the second one is just the ability to adapt. So I find it interesting to see that people who've moved from organization to organization, or lived across countries, or have done something that has required them to constantly adapt or change, have been much faster at developing, who knew that you had to develop a skill set to understand how to make senior employees comfortable with working at their homes, with everything going on in their homes, manage their household chores, and deliver. But the ability to adapt to a situation like that, who knew you were going to wake up every morning and watch numbers go up by 300,000, 200,000, 100,000, 50,000 of people infected by something that you'd never heard of in January. But that ability to just adapt and sort of step back and say, who am I in this situation? And I think both those things are underlying truths. If you are someone who has a reserve of both those qualities, I found that you do better through this period of time. And if you don't, it's funny, I'll mention a person in our own building. And we're a building where most people are, extremely educated, well-to-do, etc. But every single time from the beginning of the lockdown, residents talked about things that would be helpful to the whole building. His response was, you guys are overreacting to everything. At some point, I realized that the building turning against him wasn't going to work. The issue really was, even though he was a leader on the committee, he doesn't have an adaptive mindset. I don't want to go into what he does for a profession, etc. But there isn't a comfort level. Like he doesn't have that quality to lean on. So I think both those qualities are super important in a situation like this.
Right. Very well put, Ipsita. Thank you very much for that. And in the interest of time, I want to sort of just hand it over at this point to Kavi. And the idea is to get into a small group again. And the question to all of you is, what could I or other leaders do practically to have an impact? And, I would ask you more to look at what is the I that, all of you who are here on this particular call, what do you see yourselves doing that can be very, specific in terms of having an impact within this situation, So, Kavi?
Yes, the same format. It's going to be new groups. And this is going to be the practical element of it. So what can we do? What do you think can be done? And what are some of the things that you have in mind to help people around you to settle down and to get going with work? So that's going to be the conversation. We are going to have about 12 minutes for this. And then we'll have the same rules, one person to summarize at the end of it all. So Anmol, could you please help?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Yes.
Hi. So,
Ipsita was in the middle of her story when he got
Charles, you're saying something, but I can't hear you. Charles, you're on mute.
Actually,
this is like brutal,
This is brutal. I mean, this is just completely brutal. I mean,
welcome to the COVID world, right?
and we were just listening to Judhajit, and it was very interesting.
I think.
Okay.
It was just absolutely unfair.
And for us, it was very timely because we were listening to Arun telling us to be patient with people.
Okay. which is that one of those impossible things that come together? Arun talking about patience.
I can't imagine Arun talking about patience.
There are at least 4 of you in this forum who know me from before, and yes.
And whenever we do this work, we have these breakout rooms. It's easy, like what they say, it's easy to get into the rooms, but it's very difficult to get out because it's binary. You're in, and the next moment you're out. So it is always like that. Anyway, Kaushik, for you.
Yeah. So just what are your thoughts? If just in terms of somebody summarize the discussion in the group, just key points so that we all know what you guys talked about.
Happy to go.
Yeah, sure, Vedika.
So we had an interesting conversation. It was about impatience in action, patience with people, about looking at seizing an opportunity and putting together agile teams. So agile management and decision making. There was one concept of getting people to sort of prioritize almost in a triage sense. So are you in a stage where you're in ICU and on a ventilator, or are you in an ICU, or you're just visiting the hospital? And hence, how do you get back to health? Get out of monodimensional way of thinking. So, think of what are the right questions so that you can think of new collaborations. And then how do you nudge people away from some people who are thinking that post-COVID, when post the lockdown, life will go back to normal. And how do you nudge them away to start thinking of what the new normal is going to be? And it is not going to be the same as it used to be pre-lockdown. I think these were the few key themes which we talked.
Lovely. That is nice. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I go? I think one of the common themes we discussed is basically the recognition there is a chaos, there is a uncertainty all around, huge stress everywhere. The recognition of that fact by itself is something that we do. Like, and then how do you react to it? One is not knowing that you know all the answers, but you kind of do iteratively based on context. That is one part. The second part is kind of, the second point that we said was, we discussed was, how do you do small things, right? Listening to your daughter for whom you have no time at all, or, kind of being calm and being settled down when everyone is losing their head around because of various reasons. Even being calm and kind of say, take a step back, those kind of actions are also extremely important. That is one part. And second broad theme was kind of trying to make sense of what is happening around the world, be it, new interest in public policy or systems thinking, or, general awareness that, there is uncertainty and the world is complex. And so these are to, at a intellectual level, understand all the complexity, and at a very personal level, be calm, take one step at a time.
Right. I like the kind of breadth of stuff that you guys have, captured there in terms of the really broad areas, and then also the micro area of listening to one's daughter, or even managing oneself. So thank you for that, Ram. Okay, and who would like to represent the third group?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah,
to say, I have 2 5-year-old daughters, and after a month, I'm about done listening to my daughters. So
okay.
Remember that piece of advice. We had some great comments. I think one of the pieces that actually came across from almost everyone is the idea of just empowering and enabling people to step into leadership positions or to be leaders that we wouldn't have expected that of, who can really, at a time like this, tap into their own resilience and the resilience of sort of organizations in general. I think this idea of balancing, basically the idea of confronting people in tough conversations to remind them that this is a difficult time and to limit behavioral traits that will derail from a common objective. And then to balance that with giving people direction as well. So at the same time as we're sort of empowering leaders, the idea that, sometimes to calm down, people actually need the ability to just have something that they need to, they're being told to do. And just providing that so they have the space and the time to think and strengthen themselves emotionally. And then some of the other comments were around the fact that leaders are getting watched very closely today. So the actions they take right now, ethical and moral questions are coming up. And it's really a delicate balancing act between how do you respond to what is business critical, but how do you also how do they also serve their people? And it's balancing this idea, and I really love this phrase, of deep listening with the other end of it, which is the difficult conversations and the confrontation. And that's kind of what we had.
Lovely. And I think that if I was to look at one word that seems to capture what you're saying, Ipsita, is this thing of balance inside it, which is in various ways, I can see that balance is playing out in a certain way. And I just want to kind of close with these ideas, this particular organization that I referenced earlier, and a real conversation which had happened yesterday, and how there's a sense of frustration that you can see, which is so alive there, where one of the, a quote from this person is, "We are all managers. There's nobody here who's really a leader." And what he was meaning is that nobody's taking a step back and looking at what's the impact on everyone, and how can we facilitate those conversations which can, because there's so much negative that is going on otherwise, but how can we focus on the response and change that area, that part of the narrative to to help dealing with this kind of broader crisis. And with that, I want to kind of hand over at this point to IG. IG, over to you.
No, I think honestly, when we were kind of planning this session, we were very clear that I think this ought to be conversational, and through those conversations will emerge, I think, in some ways, the new playbook for leadership in extraordinary times like this. This is not business as usual, clearly. And I think we couldn't have had a more energizing set of conversations, listening to what each of you have shared and what we've heard in our small groups, in the large group as well. I think the effort that I think Kaushik and with a lot of help from Kavi as well have put together. I'd like to kind of thank you, Kaushik and Kavi, for designing something which I think was far more interesting and energizing than going through a typical webinar. I think some people are describing today's environment as, too many webinars, webinitis, as someone described it. I think we've tried to move away from that very clearly. This was an experiment, and we love to hear from a few of you, maybe right now or even later, how this experience was compared to what you've been through earlier, so that at least we get an opportunity to improvise and improve on what we're kind of doing. So before we close and before I kind of thank each one of you, it'll be lovely to hear a few comments from each of you, short, just off the cuff, of how this experience has kind of landed with you. Does anyone want to kind of take?
So let me go first. Firstly, I think this was really good. I got into it not really knowing what to expect, but I think the insights have been fabulous. What was really great is, hearing so many voices and hearing experiences that in many ways sort of gives a bit of reinforcement to one's own beliefs and, views on how to tackle what we're tackling. So that was great, really great. And thanks for organizing and inviting.
Thank you, Srinath. Anyone else wants to?
Yeah, so I basically wanted to say the same thing. Essentially what Srinath was saying, most of it is he's already said, so it's been a great. I also didn't know what to expect. All I knew from IG's emails was that this is going to be different. It's not only turned out to be different, it's also turned out to be quite enlightening. And separately, I quite like this breakout rooms idea. So it's the first time I'm doing this. There's another software. There's a lot of talk going on. I don't know if you've been reading the Indian government putting in 1 crore for somebody to create the Indian equivalent of Zoom because of security issues. Incidentally, there's already existing good software where they use breakout rooms like this. So I've been using it. I've never used it on Zoom, and I find this experience quite fascinating. I think it's far more easier to use the breakout rooms than I used in the other software. So that's been the other interesting part apart from the conversation itself. So thank you so much for organizing it and having me here.
Thank you so much, Vaiteeswaran.
Quick comment. Go ahead, Judhajit. Go ahead.
So I'll just echo the same sentiments. I think the technology works, IG. So I think that is a big, in a sense, I discovered. We've been using Zoom and WebEx for all our meetings, but the breakout rooms is the first time I went through. So I didn't feel that it impeded sharing and flow of thoughts. And I think that's a huge positive for any kind of virtual learning, virtual collaboration work that can happen. I understand my boys are doing Microsoft Teams for their online school, and they have similar kind of structure. Similar kind of technology. So that's apparently working very well. That's what they tell me. Though it's boring because they're not able to physically interact with each other from their perspective. But I found this really useful as a technology. And of course, it was great listening to everybody's thoughts and sharing. So I didn't miss a live session, so to speak.
That's terrific.
Yeah, I guess in a live session, probably at this point, we'd all just gone for a drink to the bar, I guess.
Well, I was going to say I miss my coffee, but yeah, a drink would be actually, a drink would be lovely.
Yeah, I would have liked to hear Judhajit for a little while longer. It's just pretty brutal.
Yeah.
You just couldn't have just yanked
Blame
off.
it on Anmol. Satish, you were saying. Sorry.
Judhajit said it far better than I could have. I think doing something which represents where the future is, getting the technology right, I think IG good living example of being the change we see needed outside us.
Got it. Vedika, thanks so much.
Sorry, was that a question to me?
Yes. If you have any comments, if you want to.
Yeah, I had promised that I will be quiet, but I realized I wasn't very quiet during the 1.5 hours. So, no, I think this was fascinating. I really enjoyed interacting with some old friends and many new. And it was really good to hear very different perspectives. And actually, I like the breakout rooms because there's a strict time limit, right? Otherwise, sometimes people love the sound of their voices and they can go on and on. I love the discipline here.
Sure.
So I'm a big fan.
Thanks so much. Arun and then Ipsita.
Yeah, I look forward to a consolidated note because I think a lot of views were presented and we are likely to forget some of those. And what I would like to then do is, create dimensions on that and see how I can use it in the work that I do. So that's what I am looking forward to.
Terrific. That's great to hear. Ipsita?
I thought this was great. It was actually great to meet a group of people. I would say the only thing I would add is just something that you can think about doing is what I really liked about the group that you had is that there is a common mindset. I don't know anybody in the group other than Charles and you, Indrajit, but I just felt like everybody in the group were people that I would be incredibly happy to work with or sort of go through this crisis with. I think given that safe space, you can push far deeper, possibly on what are our fears, what's going to happen in bad scenarios, what's leadership going to look like, what are the elements we need to get rid of. Like, I would have loved to hear some of those things from people that I feel I immediately have trust for. Whereas I feel like a lot of the comments, even though there was a wide range of them, I don't think any of us would disagree or any of us would not say, okay, those things really make a lot of sense. So I think especially in a 90-minute session, in that first 20 minutes, I think you'd established a lot of respect and a lot of comfort. And I think you could use some of that time, especially with a group like this, to just really push boundaries, because we're going into a world that is pushing us every single day. And we need to be armed better with how other smart, caring, empathetic people are thinking about this.
No, that's really, yes, sorry. No, so that's really well put, because the whole idea was to try and kind of figure out a way to create that safe, secure space for leaders to trust each other and share some of their innermost emotions and dilemmas that they were going through. There's no easy answer in a time like this. And this can't be the only conversation that accomplishes it. We're planning to do a whole series of such conversations with different groups and hopefully share some of these conversations with a wider group. We do have a Slack group, which is also quite active and growing by the day. It's almost touching 400 odd leaders and entrepreneurial founders. And that conversation is a daily conversation where they're processing different stimuli, they're processing different experiences. But I, at the end, have to thank Kaushik for wonderful, kind of manner in which you've kind of curated I know you had a lot to share, but you've also kind of very clearly synthesized and presented things that we could kind of chew on. And thank you so much for that, if you want to kind of share some of your thoughts.
I think as long as it's opened up a strand of thought, whether in agreement or whether in disagreement, I think it's fine. I think it's to me that itself is good, and I love to see the different perspectives that have come inside. It is very tough times, and we are going to have to gear ourselves to deal with it. Yeah, Kavi?
Sorry, Kavi should have the last word.
I think I've been a great fan of conversations, and it's important to have dialogue and conversations and have differences explored. I think this session provided us that base. We will need to continue these conversations, and we'll also need to be sensitive to be more present to having a multiplier effect of having these conversations forward with the people that we meet as well. And that's where the whole thing starts ignited. It doesn't stop with this group, but how many conversations does this group go have with other people, and see where that leads us to. So that's the fulcrum of the effort. So it's been great. It's been great. Sorry about the brutality of the breakout rooms, but
but to Arun's point, I think we will work on a synopsis and a kind of a document that kind of synthesizes some of this conversation. That's certainly something that we've got to do, along with the edited version of this conversation, so that you can also share it in your organizations with your colleagues and leaders. So thank you. I know we've kind of overshot the time. Apologies for that, but I hope it's been time well spent. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Meeting. Bye.
Bye. Bye.